Hello and welcome to Unacademy, a one-stop destination for the English medium civil services aspirants. 20 years ago, then Prime Minister Manmohan Singh had labeled left-wing extremism as India's biggest internal security threat. But today, 20 years later, India is on the verge of defeating Naxalism. So today we are here to discuss this success story of India, to understand this transformation. Just 2 decades ago, Naxalism, which is a type of left wing extremist ideology, which was labeled as India's biggest internal threat, is now on the verge of being decimated within a span of 20 years. So the topic is extremely relevant for UPSC civil services examination. And today I'm here to explain this topic in complete detail with a critical analysis so that it will benefit civil services aspirants, especially those who are preparing for the upcoming mains exam. Even for the general audience who are curious to know about Naxalism and left wing extremism, this discussion over the next 1.5 to 2 hours is going to provide you the intellectual depth and the clarity that is needed to understand one of India's most pressing security challenge. So today I'll be breaking down the discussion into 10 specific segments. I'll start by explaining the relevance of the topic for UPSC Civil Services exam. We'll understand this through the help of MCQs, which have already appeared in the examination. We will look at few previous questions from the mains question papers to understand why this topic is so important and so relevant. Then we are going to discuss about Maoism, which is the ideological inspiration for Naxalism in India. So, Maoism is a type of left wing extremist ideology under extreme communism, which serves as the foundational ideology for Naxalism, which took root in India. So, essentially, Maoism in India is nothing but Naxalism. So, we'll understand the Maoist principles, the features, and the doctrine, and the ideological inspiration for the Naxals in India. Then we will discuss the origin of Naxalism. We'll understand the entire history, the evolution and spread of the Naxal movement. We will also talk about the threat perception from Naxalism. We will look at different points in time over the last 60 years. Understand what threat did Naxalism pose to India and what is its current status. We will also talk about the targets of Naxals, the sources of funding and the sources of weapons, which can be relevant even for the prelims examination. Then we will talk about India's counter strategy, the strategy that India has employed over the decades, how we have refined our approach to fight against Naxalism, and how did India achieve this success as we are on the brink of defeating Naxalism by next year. So we will carry out a detailed discussion on India's counter strategy. We will talk about the March 2026 deadline that the government has set for itself to defeat and eradicate Naxalism. We will discuss recent developments such as Operation Black Forest, which remains an ongoing operation against Naxal cadres who are hiding in the forests and jungles of central and eastern India. We will carry out a critical analysis at the end so that you have some ready points available which you can directly bring into your mains answers. And the whole purpose is to help you master this important topic in just 1.5 to 2 hours. At the end, I'll also give you a couple of practice questions, mains practice questions, to help improve your answer writing skills. Now, before I start this discussion, I have just one request from all of you. If you guys are benefiting from such initiatives, if you think such videos, in-depth videos on critical topics is important and relevant, please comment below as to what other topics would you like us to cover. I promise that if you guys mention some of the important topics and if there is enough support for that, we will cover all these topics in complete detail in the coming days. And also, as a gesture, if you like the sessions, the quality of the content, do support us with your likes, press that like button. All of you, those who are watching, do press the like button and give us a feedback so we know whether these classes are helpful or not, and it serves as a motivation for us to do better. So with this, We will get started with our discussion, but first I have an important announcement, especially for those who are preparing for 2026 and beyond. So 2026 aspirants, you guys have a great opportunity to enroll for Unacademy's online classroom program at just 22,999. So you're getting a flat 50% discount on the subscription price, and you also stand to get up to 6 months of free extension. This will give you access to the live and recorded lectures, the study material, the mentorship and doubt resolution sessions, and as well as the test series. So to avail this offer, all you have to do is enter the code IAS English. On the subscription page, you might see a different price, but once you enter the code IAS English, you can avail the flat 50% discount and avail the subscription at 22,999 with up to 6 months of free extension. Now, if you guys want the detailed PDF, which I'm using in today's class, please join my Telegram channel by scanning the QR code. After the session ends, I will be sharing the PDF over here. You will see that the PDF is very detailed with a lot of important points, maps, and analysis. So this document will later help you maintain your notes, and you can add current affairs to the same notes so that you have a ready material for such an important topic. So let's begin by understanding the relevance of the topic for the civil services examination, especially for the mains exam. The topic of Naxalism, left-wing extremism, is integral to the subject of internal security. Under internal security, which is part of GS paper 3, Naxalism happens to be one of the most important topics. If you look at the syllabus given by UPSC, if you look at the first two chapters that are mentioned by UPSC, you will notice that there is a chapter on linkages between development and spread of extremism, where you study how the lack of development contributes to rise of extremism and vice versa, how you can counter extremism by promoting development and good governance. This topic is directly linked to left-wing extremism. Look at the second chapter, the role of state and non-state actors in creating security challenges for India. So these two chapters deal with various internal conflicts of India. And under these internal conflicts, Naxalism, that is left-wing extremism, happens to be one of the most important topics from where UPSC has repeatedly asked questions in the mains exam. So first, let me help you understand the conflict zones of India, which are the major internal conflict zones of India. So let's use this map and understand these conflict zones, which could be relevant even for the prelims exam. Because of late, UPSC has been asking few prelims questions from internal security in the last couple of years. So you never know. UPSC is an unpredictable public service commission. So along with a detailed mains coverage in today's session, we will pick up some important facts which could be relevant for a possible prelims question as well. Now, this region, which I am marking, that stretches across central India, eastern India, and parts of southern India, this region has often been referred to as the Naxal corridor or the Red Corridor of India. This is where the Naxal movement has been active over the last 60 plus years. Today, we have a Naxal outfit known as the CPI Maoist, which is inspired by the Maoist ideology, which has been waging a war against the Indian state. So the Naxal movement, which has affected central, eastern, and southern parts of India and few other pockets of the country, happens to be one of the biggest internal security threats that we have dealt with. It also happens to be one of India's oldest insurgencies, dating back to the 1960s. So you can imagine, if this extremist movement has survived more than 60 years, and if it still remains a threat for India, you can understand the significance of this threat and why the topic is so important for our exams under internal security. Then apart from the Naxal corridor, the three other major conflict zones include the state of Punjab, which has been affected by the Khalistan movement, particularly in the 1980s, with the direct sponsorship of Pakistan. Khalistan insurgency and terrorism remained one of India's biggest security challenges. Though India managed to put down the movement and Khalistan movement became dormant, of late we are seeing attempts to revive the Khalistan movement. So this is probably one more topic which I can cover in detail if you guys are interested and if you guys are ready to support such initiatives. So do let me know in the comment section. Then in Jammu and Kashmir, India has been affected by state-sponsored insurgency and terrorism, again from our neighboring country, Pakistan. A direct involvement of Pakistani state actors in backing terrorist groups against India, backing Kashmiri separatists, and we have a raging security situation in Jammu and Kashmir. Then finally, we have the northeast sector, which has been badly affected by insurgency since the time of India's independence. Right from 1947, the Northeast region has witnessed multiple insurgencies across different states, led by different insurgent groups, each with their own objective, each with their own agenda. Even today, Northeast insurgency remains a cause for deep concern, though the conflict has largely stabilized. So, amongst these four major conflict zones that are present in the country, Naxal corridor has seen the biggest destabilization. The Naxal movement has posed one of the biggest threats for the Indian state. And that is why the topic is extremely important. Now, don't just think that this is an old topic. Don't just think that the static part of this discussion won't be relevant for the exam, because there are some current developments, very significant developments that are happening in the last few months. Recently, Union Home Minister Amit Shah and as well as Prime Minister Narendra Modi, they have set a very ambitious target for the Indian security forces to eliminate Naxalism by 31st March 2026. So we are barely a few months away from this target, and we have already seen tremendous success in the last couple of years. And most experts believe that India is on the verge of defeating Naxalism. That's why the title of the topic, RIP Naxalism. Many experts believe Naxalism is at its end game. We might see the decimation of Naxal movement, which has posed such a serious threat for India's security. So, in the context of all these recent developments, it becomes very, very important to assess and analyze everything that is related to Naxalism from a academic and intellectual perspective. So, this will not just be a superficial discussion of some basic facts, but it will be an in-depth analysis of the entire topic. That's why I'm not rushing through, trying to finish this in 30 minutes or 40 minutes. This would be a good 1.5 to 2 hour discussion, focusing on all the aspects of Naxalism, so that this should be your one-stop destination to understand everything about Naxalism. Tomorrow, if there is a question on this topic, you should be able to answer that by directly depending on this session. That is the purpose, the intention of this class. Now, take a look at the PYQs, the previous questions that UPSC has already asked on this topic. In 2013-2015, we had direct questions related to left-wing extremism and Naxalism. We have seen this repeat in 2020, 2018, 2022. These are the 5 direct questions that have been asked on Naxalism and left-wing extremism. If you read the questions carefully, you will actually understand that the same topic is repeating. The structure of the question might be different. The sentences used might be slightly different. But essentially, the question is more or less asking you the same thing. So UPSC has a tendency to repeat these topics. So if you prepare holistically for such topics, if there is a question again, you will be in a position to answer it really well and score the maximum marks possible. Apart from these 5 direct questions, there have been other indirect questions as well that have been asked in internal security that are related to Naxalism. For example, we had questions on India's internal security threats in general. Such questions have been asked 2-3 times in the last 10 years. There have been questions on the role of organized crime, money laundering, how it enables security threats. This is also related to Naxalism. Whatever you study in this chapter today, you can directly use them in these other related topics as well. So up to 10 questions have already come. 5 direct and at least 5 indirect questions. And that is why I'm saying this session is going to be very important for you. So let's get started. And let's first understand what is Maoism, what is this ideology, what is this term left-wing extremism, And why is Maoism called as Naxalism in India? This is where many beginners have a confusion. So let's clarify what is left-wing extremism first. Then I will explain Maoism and what is Naxalism. When you look at political ideologies on the political spectrum, there are different political thoughts which we can categorize. For example, we have the centrist political thought, which favors liberal democracy, fundamental rights, free speech and expression. On both sides of the centrist ideology, we have the right of center and left of center. So, as you move towards the right on the political spectrum, you will see that there is greater preference, greater priority given to religion, tradition, culture, nationalism. There is more focus on capitalist economy. These are some traits and features of right wing ideology. As you move towards right wing extremism, aspects like religion, tradition, culture, nationalism, they gain more and more importance. If you move towards the left, religion, tradition, culture, nationalism, these aspects acquire less and less significance and less priority. You see a move towards more egalitarian values, more progressive values. But there is a strong criticism for both left wing and right wing ideology. See, today our purpose is not to take any political sides. The idea is just to understand why extremism of all sorts can be dangerous. See, in a civilized democratic state, ideologies which fall within this boundary that I'm drawing here in a red box, all these ideologies are acceptable, they are tolerable. Be it centrist political thought, right of center, left of center political thought, or even right wing ideology and left wing ideology. All these ideologies within the red box that you're seeing here, the boundary that I've drawn, they're all tolerable, acceptable in a civilized democratic state. Because these ideologies, though they differ, they eventually believe in democratic setup. They believe in elections. They believe in rule of law, and they respect and uphold the constitution. So these ideologies between left wing and right wing, that includes left of center, right of center, and centrist ideology, they're all acceptable in a civilized democratic state. But the moment you cross this boundary on either side, the moment you cross this boundary either towards the left or the right, you enter the path of extremism. Outside this boundary towards the left, we have left wing extremism, which is an extremely dangerous ideology. Similarly, as you cross this boundary towards the right, you enter right wing extremism, which is equally dangerous for a civilized democratic state. In right wing extremism, usually you see strands of religious fundamentalism or a belief in fascist ideology, a belief in racial, ethnic superiority. Right wing extremism eventually results in dictatorships. It will result in mass violence, terrorism, and large scale human atrocities. Similarly, left wing extremism also contributes. Left wing extremism also results in dictatorship. It results in large scale violence and serious human right violations. That is why these two ideologies are referred to as extremist ideologies. Be it left wing extremism or right wing extremism, both are equally dangerous and cannot be tolerated in any civilized democratic state. So now that you have a rough idea as to what is left wing extremism, Maoism is one type of left wing extremism that has its roots in extreme communism. I'll repeat my point. Left wing extremism essentially has different strands, and Maoism is one type of left wing extremism which has its origin in extreme communism. Now, what is communism? Communism is a political ideology, a radical political thought that originated as an opposition to capitalism, capitalist exploitation. So, communism has its roots in the ideology of Karl Marx, a well-known legendary political thinker, a philosopher. Karl Marx believed that there is an inherent class struggle in the society, primarily on income lines and social lines. The society is divided between the proletariat and the bourgeois. These terms essentially refer to the elite class, being the bourgeois, elite industrialists, capitalists, the wealthy, the rich, the politically influential. They fall under the category of the bourgeois, representing the elite section of the society, who control political power, control all the wealth and the resources. The proletariat, on the other hand, is a reference to the workers, the labor in the society, who basically earn wages for the day to day labor that they are performing, for the work that they are performing in the economy, right? These workers, the industrial class essentially, they struggle through they struggle through poverty without putting their hard work, without earning their daily wages. There is no other way out for the proletariat class to survive, to sustain their livelihood. Whereas the bourgeois, the capitalist class, enjoy the riches of the wealth, enjoy the fruits of growth and economic activity, which is essentially carried out by the lower classes, the proletariat classes. Now, this is what Karl Marx viewed as inherently a major social, economic, and income divide in the society. And Karl Marx advocated a revolutionary path to change this narrative, to essentially cause an upheaval in the social order, to change the status quo, so that the working class could take matters into their own hands, lead a revolution, a political revolution, to snatch the power from the bourgeois, to ensure that the proletariat class can raise its voice, represent themselves, and take the political and economic power to ensure more equality and create a inclusive, equitable society. Now, this ideology of Karl Marx sounds very good theoretically on paper. This serves as the foundation for the theory of communism, which rose up in opposition to capitalist exploitation. But other communist leaders and thinkers who came later, for example, the likes of Lenin from the USSR, Lenin built upon Marx's ideology and he advocated a more radical extremist path where he championed the revolution, the idea of revolution, as a violent path of insurrection. Lenin not only advocated revolution from the proletariat, from the masses, he pointed out that there is a need for a vanguard party, a single party, a communist party, which could stand for the proletariat, which could unify the voice of the working class and represent the lower classes and lead that political revolution, the struggle, even if it turns violent. And Lenin openly advocated a centralized dictatorial hierarchy. He believed that without state control, communism will not succeed. The revolution cannot happen. Lenin essentially pointed out that there should be a dictatorship of the proletariat. This is where the communist ideology moved from the moderate revolutionary path of Karl Marx towards violent extremism, a type of left-wing extremism. You might have heard about the horrors in USSR under Lenin's rule. Lenin believed that only the Communist Party could be the savior of the working class, that the entire working class should be united and there should be a vanguard party, a single party representing the voice of the working class, which will form a dictatorial government where the state is supreme. Essentially, the party itself, the vanguard party, the Communist Party, right, acting as the voice of the working class, would transform itself into the state. So this would be the rule of the state, the rule of the commune, where the state would own, it would own all the wealth, the resources, control all the manners of production, control the economy itself. And the utopian idea here was that the government knows what is best. A supreme dictator knows what is best for the people. A dictatorship formed by the proletariat will always work towards the working class. That was the assumption that was made. That such a dictatorship, even if it engages in violence and crushes free rights, It was seen as a price to be paid to ensure equality in the society. But this radical extremist ideology only led to brutal atrocities being committed, mass violence being committed in the USSR. Because under this trend of Leninism, there is no scope for dissent. You can't question the dictatorship, the state, the Communist Party. It is considered as supreme, and the leader, who is seen as a supreme authority, is unquestionable. This only perpetuates violence, it perpetuates the dictatorship, and essentially results in such extremist developments. Then came Mao Zedong in China. The Communist Party had taken root in China. The ideology of Karl Marx and Lenin was spreading far and wide across the world by 1900s. So by 1920s, 1930s, communist ideology took root in China, and the Communist Party of China was established in the 1920s. Now, this was a time when then China, the Republic of China, which was ruled by the Kuomintang Party, the KMT, under the leadership of Chiang Kai-shek, it was going through a period of turmoil. The Chinese masses, the farmers, the workers, the peasants, the landless laborers, they felt that the ruling class was exploiting them. They felt that the government of Republic of China was corrupt. It did not care about the masses. It didn't care about the Chinese identity. Because see, throughout history, particularly medieval history and modern history as well, China has seen a lot of outside exploitation from outside powers, imperial imposition, colonial exploitation, be it the British or the French who meddled with the Chinese economy, or the Japanese who conducted brutal invasions, committing brutal atrocities against the Chinese. So these outside exploitations, which were colonial, imperial in nature, had created a sense of fear and insecurity amongst the Chinese masses. They felt that their identity had been lost. The pride of Chinese civilization had been destroyed. The glory of the Chinese empires had been destroyed. And they blamed the ineffective, corrupt governments, such as the Republic of China, the Kuomintang Party. Such resentment, anger was present amongst the masses. And that is where the Communist Party took birth. In the midst of this turmoil and chaos, that is where the Communist Party of China took birth. And eventually, it was led by Mao Zedong or Mao Zedong. Mao Zedong advocated one of the most extremist forms of communism. His ideology was that the masses have to take matters into their own hands. They have to lead an uprising, a mass protracted war, a civil war, by taking arms into their hands to fight the corrupt state, to throw the state out and capture state power through an armed civil war. Mao Zedong advocated a complete revolution. He spoke about the rural masses. For the first time, communism was focusing on the rural masses and agrarian economy, because Karl Marx and even Lenin, they were primarily focused on the industrial class, the working class in cities, urban areas where factories were flourishing. Until then, communism had not exclusively focused on the rural agrarian economy, where there was a lot of distress. So Mao Zedong exploited these sentiments, and he pushed for an agrarian revolution, calling for the farmers, the peasants, and landless laborers, along with the industrial workers, to rebel against the Chinese state. So he advocated guerrilla warfare tactics, essentially a type of insurgent movement, a type of insurgency to topple the state, to capture state power, and establish the Communist Party as the sole authority which would form the government of China. So, this uprising in China, which was inspired by Maoist ideology, Mao Zedong's ideology, is what led to the Chinese Civil War that lasted from 1930s to 1949. The Chinese Civil War would break out between the Communist Party and other communist factions, and those who were opposed to the Republic of China, led by the Kuomintang Party, led by Chiang Kai-shek. This brutal civil war led to large-scale human rights violations. Millions of people were slaughtered. And eventually, in 1949, Communist Party won the civil war. The Communist Party under Mao Zedong, inspired by the Maoist ideology, which was an inherently violent extremist ideology, managed to topple the Republic of China from power throughout the Kuomintang party, and it was cornered into Taiwan. Kuomintang party and its leader Chiang Kai-shek, they were pushed out into the small island in East China Sea, pushed out into Taiwan, and the Republic of China regime, the government shifted its base to Taiwan. It lost control over mainland China, and mainland China came under the control of the Communist Party of China. This marked the end of the Civil War, where the communists emerged victorious, and it led to the establishment of the modern Chinese state, which we now refer to as the PRC, the People's Republic of China. I'm sure all of you know that PRC, our neighbor China, it's a single party state where Communist Party is the only party. You don't have democratic elections, you don't have free speech and fundamental rights. The single party becomes the state, and the general secretary of the Communist Party assumes the role of the supreme leader, the premier, the president. That is the role Xi Jinping occupies today. So the communists won the conflict. The Kuomintangs were pushed out into Taiwan. And the Taiwan issue that you all hear about, that you read about, where the PRC claims sovereignty over Taiwan as well, and someday hopes to integrate Taiwan into China's sovereignty. That whole issue is related to this conflict, the Civil War, which was fought between the communists and the Kuomintangs. So this is the brief history of Maoism, a type of left-wing extremist ideology. So the historical roots of Maoism can be traced to modern China, the 1920s, 40s, when the country went through a civil war led by the peasants, led by those who felt oppressed under a corrupt elite regime. Mao Zedong wrote several books as well during the period, which essentially outlined ideology, the principles, and even the combat tactics that should be followed by the Maoists, who are members of the Communist Party of China. He writes in his book, Guerrilla Warfare and Protracted War, two very famous works of Mao Zedong, under which he delineates the philosophy of Maoism. He built upon the ideology of Karl Marx, gave it a violent extremist turn, built upon the radicalism of Lenin, the dictatorship that Lenin advocated, and provided for a new violent extremist ideology as the only path for the upliftment of the masses. Now, any sensible person will be able to realize that in a democratic state, in a modern civilized state, there is no scope, there is no opportunity to even entertain such radical extremist thoughts. See, maybe one can empathize, sympathize with the struggle of the Chinese masses in that era, in the 1930s. You can understand why the civil war took place, why the masses backed Mao Zedong's ideology. In fact, when PRC was established, India was one of the first countries to understand the struggle of the Chinese. We sympathized with the people, and we were one of the first democratic countries to recognize the PRC, to establish relations with the Communist Party-led government. But post 1950s, as the world entered into the modern era, in a democratic state like India, there is absolutely no scope to tolerate such extremist violent ideologies. Why? Because this ideology is rooted in violence. Violence is inherent to Maoism, it is integral to Maoism. So, if you look at the core philosophy that Mao Zedong advocated, what is the end objective of these Maoists? What is their end game, the end goal? Their goal is to capture state power, nothing else. To topple the existing regime and capture the state power through an armed insurgency by carrying out a mass mobilization, bringing the masses together, the proletariat, essentially, the working class, the agrarian economy, the rural uh, population, essentially, the farmers, the peasants, the landless. Bring them together for a mass uprising, and taking up arms is non negotiable under the Maoist philosophy. There is no other option which is even considered. See, it is understandable that the proletariat classes have been oppressed, they seek justice, they seek equality. But resorting to violence to secure justice, to secure some sort of equitable governance, is something which can't be accepted as it glorifies violence. It encourages the masses to target the state forces, the security forces, to target the government and the establishment. Capturing state power is the end goal through this mass mobilization, and Mao Zedong highlighted the importance of a protracted people's war. So, in that regard, Mao Zedong was quite a genius when it came to strategic and tactical thinking. He understood that a powerful state can't be defeated so easily. Even if the masses rebel and rise up, even if millions of people are backing the movement, eventually the state will bring the full might of the security forces to crush any such rebellion. Mao Zedong understood that. He realized that this war may not end soon. You may not see a quick victory. The Maoists may not be able to capture state power in few months or few years. This might drag for decades, even a century if required. So he encouraged the Maoists not only to carry out a mass mobilization, to bring and unite the masses, to exploit their resentment, but he also advocated the Maoists to be prepared for a protracted conflict. He understood that such a movement, such an insurgency would have ups and downs. There would be a peak in violence. The state will target and crush the movement. There would be a decline in the movement. And the Maoists are prepared for this. They are prepared for the long haul. They are prepared for the long struggle. They will try to regroup. They will try to re-strategize and revive the movement maybe a few years later. So this is a movement which has a very strong ideological underpinning. Now, when you're fighting such an extremist threat, you can't easily defeat such a strong ideological movement without addressing some of the root causes that might be present. Because by now, I think you have realized that some of the root causes which were affecting the farmers, the peasants, the laborers, some of them were genuine. The agrarian distress, the land related issues, the income divide, the social discrimination and oppression of the lower classes. These were genuine root causes which Mao Zedong was exploiting. Extreme communism essentially exploits these sentiments. It exploits the resentment of the masses and turns this into a strategy for indoctrination, essentially to brainwash the masses through propaganda, to highlight the failures of the state, use the anger and resentment of the masses, and turn the masses against the state. These Maoists, the extreme communists, they are not truly interested in the upliftment of the weaker classes or the proletariat. Their primary interest, as you can see here, is to capture power. Their primary goal is to capture state power for themselves, ensure the Communist Party comes to power, and the top leadership assumes control, dictatorial control, with the supreme leader assuming supreme authority. That is their primary purpose and goal, not the upliftment of the masses. They just exploit these sentiments, the resentment, the anger which is present at the grassroots level, to turn the sentiment against the government and instigate a mass uprising, to instigate an armed insurgency. So please get this clear. Be very, very clear about this. Maoist ideology, left-wing extremist ideology of any kind, of any form, cannot be tolerated in a democratic, civilized state. See, there could be failures in governance. There could be some injustice that might happen to the rural population, to the lower classes. But in a democratic setup like India, in post-independence India, there are different avenues, different paths through which you can try to redress these grievances. You can appeal to the government, you can protest. You have a basic fundamental right to protest against the government. You can approach the judiciary. You can expose corruption and issues through media coverage, through media publicity. You can form NGOs and civil society organizations to bring pressure on the government to carry out welfare work and relief work to uplift the people. You can even stand for elections, contest yourself, hoping to form the next democratic government. So, in a democratic civilized state, there are many different routes and paths and options for those who are aggrieved, for those who have resentment, for those who feel that they have been genuinely targeted or oppressed, those who have this sense of injustice which has been done by the government. They have different paths to explore. Yes, I agree, maybe that path is not easy. Not everybody will be able to take these paths to stand up against the government, against the failures of governance. and maybe not everyone will secure justice. But eventually, that is the only civilized, tolerable path in a democratic society. Just because there is a failure of governance, there is some sense of injustice. You can't use that as an excuse to take up arms, to take up violence, to target the state, and to commit brutal atrocities. This is where Maoist ideology becomes extremist. It fails, it falls apart. It can't be justified on any grounds. Though you can sympathize with the root causes, with the affected masses, you can never support armed violence in a modern civilized democracy. Now, you let me know what you think about this. What is your view on this in the comment section? Now, let's understand a little more about the Maoist doctrine. I told you that Mao Zedong has written these books, Guerrilla Warfare, Protracted People's War. In these works, Mao Zedong not only highlights the principles, the goal, and the ideology, he even goes into the details of the insurgency. He talks about what kind of insurgency should be carried out, what should be the operational tactics that should be employed by the Maoists to ensure that they succeed in this protracted people's war. This is exactly what Maoists have adopted. So, after the Maoists succeeded in China, after they won the civil war in China and formed the People's Republic of China, this radical extremist ideology spread around the world. It spread to several countries, including India, later Nepal, even countries like Philippines, several countries in South and Latin America. So many such countries witnessed the rise of the Maoist movement, the local version of Maoism. So the Maoism that took root in India is what we call as Naxalism. So essentially, Naxalism is nothing but Maoism. It's the same philosophy, the same principles, the same strategy and tactics. In India, it's called by a different name. It's known by a different name. It's known as Naxalism. And I'll explain why in a little while. So, this ideology has spread to many countries in the past, triggered Maoist insurgencies. And allegedly, the PRC is involved in sponsoring and supporting the spread of this radical ideology. In fact, this also explains why the PRC today is such an aggressive, violent power. Why China believes in military aggression. Why China believes in being aggressive against its neighbors and outside powers. That can be explained by the core ideology of the PRC. It goes all the way back to the establishment of PRC, the Civil War of China. Because the core philosophy of modern China is Maoism. The Communist Party, which is in power even today, its core belief lies in Maoist values, Maoist principles and ideology, where violence is non-negotiable. Violence is seen as the only path. Aggression is promoted as the only way to protect their interests. That explains why modern China, PRC as a state, as a communist state, is so aggressive against other powers, especially against regional powers. Why it resorts to diplomatic and military aggression can be explained through this history of Maoism. Now let's look at the tactics of guerrilla warfare that was advocated by Mao Zedong. These are the features of Maoist insurgency, be it the Maoist insurgency in India or the Maoist insurgency that we saw in Nepal or in other countries. The Maoists essentially follow the same path, the same operational tactics and strategies in order to defeat the state and capture state power. First and foremost, Mao Zedong advocated that Maoists have to build popular support. Now, this movement can't be run by few individuals. A few hundred people, few thousand people can't succeed in such a war because you're fighting the state, you're fighting a powerful government. The government will crush that movement with brutal force. So Mao Zedong understood the need for mass support. He advocated Maoists to build that mass support by spotting the resentment in different sections of the society, in different parts of the country. Such resentment and anger could be present amongst the farmers in rural areas, the peasants and landless workers. It could be present amongst industrial workers in cities and urban areas, right? Or even amongst tribal population if the country has a tribal population. Because usually government policies could lead to interference in tribal rights and access to tribal wealth and resources. So various sections of the society in various parts of the country might have anger and resentment against the state. So Mao Zedong advocated that the Maoists, the leadership of the Communist Party, they have to spot these divides, these internal social divisions, and exploit that to their advantage. Turn this resentment and anger into a mass rebellion by brainwashing them, by indoctrinating them, by radicalizing them through the propaganda of the Maoists. So, for this purpose, Mao Zedong highlighted the importance of communication and propaganda. Communists are masters of propaganda. Maoists, in particular, they are masters of propaganda to use fake news, misinformation, to turn the public narrative, to instigate the masses to turn against the government. They know how to communicate with their surrounding. For example, let's say there is a village where a drought has occurred and the government has not provided relief to the farmers. The Maoists will spot the failure in governance. They know that the farmers are angry in this village. So they will discreetly approach the villagers. They will talk to them. They will print the Maoist ideology, try to spread flyers and material, literature to ensure that the villagers read about the ideology and get inspired by it. They even conduct street plays. They bring the village community together, address them, deliver these speeches to instigate them and motivate them to rise up. And they will turn this anger into an armed rebellion. They'll convince the farmers that taking weapons is the only way for you to secure justice. Taking arms against this government, corrupt government, is the only way to address your injustice. So, this pure propaganda and effective communication is what helps the Maoists to create the mass support. This is a classic feature of Maoist insurgency. Is that clear? These Maoists, they don't run away. They don't hide in particular. They openly challenge the government. Because tomorrow, if they wish to form the future state, if they want to form the future government, they should be visible. They should declare where they are operating, the area, the region where they are operating. And they approach the aggrieved population and they communicate with them. They motivate them, they radicalize and brainwash them, and try to garner support by recruiting them into the Maoist cause. So they are masters of propaganda and communication. This is a very important tactic that Mao Zedong himself talks about in guerrilla warfare and in protracted people's war. He also highlights the importance of the terrain, the topography, the geography of the region. Because these Maoists are going to declare an open war against the government. They will try to hold on to these territories where they are inspiring these armed rebellions. So, most likely, such rebellions will be formed by the locals, the local farmers, local peasants, local industrial workers who know the local geography and terrain very well. So, Mao Zedong called upon the Maoists to exploit the local terrain to their advantage. The locals will be well versed with the demography of the region, the population profile. They would be well versed with the physical geography as well, the mountains, the forests, the rivers. So they know very well how to hide, how to camouflage themselves, how to use it to their advantage to target the government and the security forces. So exploiting the terrain is a core principle of guerrilla warfare. You can also call it jungle warfare, as Maoists are encouraged right from the beginning to master the jungle, to control the jungle, use the local geography and topography to their advantage while they target the security forces. So, this is a core strategy, a core operational tactic employed by the Maoist insurgents. Mao Zedong advocated the use of surprise ambush attacks, which is essentially the basis of guerrilla warfare. He called upon the Maoists to target the security forces in a surprising manner. Though they are declaring an open war, calling for open confrontation, they will not face the forces in the open battlefield. Rather, they will hide, they will camouflage themselves in the forests, in the deep remote areas, in the jungles, in the rural pockets. And when the time is right, they will strike by carrying out these surprise ambush attacks. The goal is to lure the security forces into the strong areas, the strongholds, which are controlled by the Maoists. and deliver these surprise attacks, because this has a shock value, a shock element. Security forces may not be fully prepared for such surprise attacks, which is a classic feature of guerrilla warfare, jungle warfare. So, this is again a very core strategy and tactic which is employed by the Maoists, launching these surprise ambush attacks, trying to lure the forces into their stronghold, trying to invite them in, and launching these surprise attacks against the forces, trying to kill as many security forces as possible. Another important feature of Maoist insurgency is that Mao Zedong advocated to recruit high quality cadres into the organization, not some random individuals, but those who are highly motivated, who are strongly driven. So there is a lot of focus on recruiting quality cadres who are not only physically fit, but they should also have some intellectual capability. In fact, many Maoists are well read, right? They actually would have a very high level of education as well sometimes. And they are asked to form a hierarchical organization. A well organized hierarchy is visible in a Maoist insurgency. In a Maoist insurgency, there would be the political phase of the struggle, a political arm of the movement representing the political interests. There would be a central leadership formed with a central committee and the Politburo and Politburo Standing Committee, which forms the highest levels of decision making in the Communist Party. There would be a separate branch for military operations, for the insurgent operations, which would be the armed wing of the Maoists, which engages in the surprise guerrilla attacks. There would be a separate branch, a separate wing or a unit for intelligence gathering, for intelligence collection, a separate department or an organ for propaganda and communication, a separate battalion or a unit for raising the funds, for sourcing arms and weapons. So it's almost like they're replicating the government machinery. They are basically trying to create a parallel government like structure. This is another feature of Maoist insurgency. They replicate government machinery. Just like a government has different ministries, departments, and organs, it has separate armed forces, intelligence agencies, media communication agencies. Similarly, Maoists try to replicate government machinery. They almost try to create a parallel government because tomorrow their goal is to capture the state power and run the administration for themselves. So they have to convince the masses, convince the people, the locals, that they have the capability to govern in the future. So that is the reason why they replicate government machinery, run a parallel government, and have a very well organized hierarchy. And they recruit quality cadres to ensure that they can prove to the local population that they have the ability to govern in the future. That's why if you look at some left-wing extremist insurgent groups, let's say Northeast India also, you have few left-wing extremist inspired insurgent groups. They have these designations within the central leadership. Some of the top leaders would have designated themselves as prime minister, defense minister, army chief. These ranks, they would have given it to themselves because they're claiming to run a parallel government. They're trying to replicate the government structure. And more importantly, Mao Zedong focused heavily on the military capabilities of the Maoists. Eventually, this is what will determine whether the Maoists will succeed or not. He called upon the Maoists to build up the required capabilities, to focus on training, on motivation, and ensure that technology is adopted. Ensure that latest arms and weapons are procured, latest communication tools are used by the Maoists, and they even employ military grade tactics, military grade tactics for their operations against the government and the security forces. So you can't take the Maoists lightly. It's not just a bunch of young radicalized youth. This would be a well organized machinery, a well organized rebellion where military grade training is provided. Sophisticated arms and weapons are sourced and procured. Advanced communication is procured. They employ the latest military tactics on the battlefield and they really focus on building their military capabilities. That is one more feature that you see in Maoism. That is why you can't take this threat lightly. And finally, They believe in creating their base areas, and they create these strongholds where they exercise control, where they exercise their influence, and they try to throw the administration out one by one, from district to district, village to village, state to state. They slowly try to throw out the civil administration, the government which is in place. They target the local government officials, the elections, they target the security forces. Their goal is to create these small pockets of strongholds where they control the territory, remove the government stage by stage, and call them as so called liberated areas or liberated zones. In these so called liberated zones, these Maoist committees, which are there, which is part of the political leadership, they will try to run the administration. They will try to run a parallel government. This is where Maoism becomes a serious national security threat. Now, if you look at Maoism in India, if you try to understand the roots, the origin, there's a very interesting history behind this. And that is what I would like to explore in the next 1 hour. Discuss the entire history, the evolution and spread, understand some of the root causes, and talk about the current threat level and India's counter strategy. This is what we will cover in the next 1 hour before we end the discussion for today. Now, if you guys are liking the discussion up until now, if you feel the discussion is useful, please let me know through the comments, press the like button, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel as well. And please let us know in the comments which other topics would you like us to cover. Mention some important topics where in-depth analysis is required. We will be more than happy to oblige. Now, coming to Naxalism in India, how did Maoism take root in our country? When did it start? Where did it begin? More importantly, why is Maoism called as Naxalism in India? See, Maoism in India is called as Naxalism because it took birth in the Naxalbari village of West Bengal in the year 1967. That is the birth of Maoism in our country. The roots were already there by 1960s. There were few Maoist elements, extremist communist leaders who were trying to spread this ideology, trying to create the momentum for an armed rebellion. But the actual fire was ignited in the year 1967 in the village of Naxalbari in West Bengal. That's why Maoism in India is called as Naxalism, named after Naxalbari. Now, where is Naxalbari located? If you look at the map here on your screen, you will see Siliguri corridor, the strategic choke point of India, the chicken's neck of India, a very narrow strip of land corridor, hardly 22 kilometers wide, that is sandwiched between Nepal and Bangladesh, which is the only access we have towards the northeast region. So near Siliguri, hardly 25-30 kilometers from there, approximately over here, closer to the borders with Nepal, this is where Naxalbari village is located. This is where the first Maoist uprising was witnessed in India. Hence, Maoism in India is known as Naxalism, named after Naxalbari village, where the first uprising was noted. Now, if you have studied history, you would know that West Bengal, or in general, even in colonial India, the Bengal region, the Bengal province, was primarily affected by landlordism. West Bengal primarily had a feudal society, which is found post-independent in post-independence India as well, in West Bengal and Bihar, where a feudal structure existed, where landlords from the upper classes, usually from the upper caste, would control the land, and farmers, peasants, landless laborers, they would toil in these farmlands, working for these so-called landlords. So a clear divide existed on social lines, on income lines. There was a lot of anger, resentment that had built up amongst the peasants, the landless laborers, and farmers who were being exploited and abused by the landlordism. During colonial rule, these upper caste landlords had struck deals with the British. The British were enabling these landlords to control the land because eventually the British cared only about the taxes. So, in the process, the masses were getting exploited. So, post independence, there was a lot of hope amongst Indians of different sections, different class, that there would be upliftment, that there would be an end to this exploitation. Because as India became independent, we adopted democracy, adopted a constitution to turn into a republic, promising basic rights, fundamental rights to our people, promising equal treatment, an end to all forms of discrimination. That is what brought India together. The people of India post independence had a lot of expectations from the government. They had a lot of hope that a democratic constitutional India would deliver upliftment, equality, and end such forms of oppression and discrimination. In this regard, some land reforms were initiated, which you study in economy classes, to ensure that land, which is a vital resource, is equitably distributed. Landlordism was banned. Feudal nature of the society was supposed to be broken. But despite the attempts of the government, these reforms were not reflected on the ground. By 1960s, the peasants and farmers and landless laborers, they realized that there was no relief for them even in independent India. For them, independence meant nothing. They were being exploited even during colonial rule. They were still being exploited by the landlords post independence as well. That's because some of these landlords who were rich and influential and powerful, they had good relations with local politicians and political leaders. They were in a corrupt nexus with some of the government leaders, with the police, with the local government officials, bribing them and taking their support to crush any opposition from the peasants and the farmers and laborers. So, after decades of exploitation, the frustration broke out and it turned into a violent uprising where the peasants took weapons, took arms in their hands, and slaughtered the landlords in Naxalbari. Now, this did not happen on its own. It's not that peasants and farmers here learnt about Naxalism on their own, right? They had no clue about Maoist ideology. But this ideology was spread carefully. The then Maoist leaders who had taken root in India a few years ago in 1960s, they were actively spreading the philosophy of Maoism, especially in central and eastern parts of India, because they knew that this is where the potential lies. If you look at eastern India, the feudal society was dominant. The communist leaders who were leading the Maoist uprising in the country, they understood that farmers and peasants here were being exploited by money lenders and the landlords. So they had a lot of anger and resentment against them and the government, which was not able to crack down on these illegal practices. In central India, in the forested belt of India, the Dandakaranya region around the Chota Nagpur plateau, which is blessed with mineral wealth and forest resources, local communities were not seeing the fruits of development. Tribal communities, forest dwelling tribes in particular, they felt the government was not working for them. They felt tribal rights were being compromised because of government policies and laws. So these Maoist leaders who initially laid the foundation of this movement, they spotted the resentment in central eastern parts of India. They took root in this region and they were already spreading the ideology slowly by 1960s. In fact, our intelligence reports clearly indicate that 2 to 3 years before 1967, few Maoist elements from the breakaway faction of the Communist Party of India, they were already involved in fanning the Maoist ideology, instilling people with radical thoughts, supplying arms to them, trying to push for a rebellion, trigger such violence. This movement was essentially founded in India by three notorious communist extremists who were heavily inspired by Chinese communism, Maoism. The names of these three individuals are Charu Mazumdar. You can see him in the image over here. Kanu Sanyal and Jungle Santal. These three are seen to be primarily responsible for promoting extreme form of communism. See, please understand when it comes to communism, there are different strands of communism. I already told you that the ideology of Karl Marx is still moderate. It does believe in a revolution, but a political revolution, not a violent one. So Marxism is still a moderate form of communism, which is acceptable in a democratic state. For example, we have the CPI Marxist today, which is part of mainstream politics in India. Right? The CPI Marxist contests elections. It has formed state governments repeatedly in Kerala, in West Bengal, in Tripura. So don't think all forms of communism is bad. CPI Marxist ideology which is essentially moderate, which believes in political democracy, this ideology is tolerable. It is part of mainstream politics in our country. But there were few radical elements in the CPI Marxist who broke from the party. They deviated from the path because they were inspired by Leninism. They were inspired by Maoism, which is clearly a violent, extremist form of communism. These Leninists, Maoists, they splintered from the Communist Party, broke from the Marxist path, and started advocating violence as the only solution. These Maoists, like Charu Mazumdar, were actively working underground in the rural pockets, in the tribal belt, and as well as in colleges and universities across the country to trigger the youth and radicalize them to push for an armed rebellion against the Indian state. So that is the origin story of Naxalism in India. Is that clear? Naxal Bari is where the first opportunity presented for these Maoists. They instigated the peasants and the landless, armed them, instigated them for an armed rebellion. And as a result, the landlords were targeted and slaughtered, resulting in the first Maoist violence in the country. From here onwards, Maoist movements spread quite rapidly across different parts of the country, especially central and eastern parts of India. Now, before we understand its further evolution and spread, let's talk about the root causes. Let's examine what are the root causes, how genuine were these root causes. The first and foremost, the Maoists, essentially the Naxals in India, they exploited the social divisions. They focused on the lower, weaker sections who had felt oppressed from decades and centuries. They focused on the caste divide in the country, the horrific caste system, a legacy of Indian civilization. It had led to centuries of oppression of the Dalits, of the lower castes, who were exploited, dominated by the upper caste. So there was centuries of anger and resentment that was held by the Dalits and the lower castes, which could be easily tapped and exploited. This was a major social divide in our country, which unfortunately exists and remains even today. The large income divide, the huge difference between the rich elites, the upper class, and the poor lower classes, the rampant poverty, the rampant levels of poverty across different parts of the country, the poor people across rural areas or urban areas who look at the upper class rich and elites leading a luxurious life, controlling all wealth, controlling all political power and resources, whereas they themselves, millions of them, are deprived of even a basic survival. This harsh reality of India essentially became one of the root causes. So, wherever poverty was widely prevalent, where caste divide was prevalent, where the social income divisions were present, these areas, these pockets of India became vulnerable for Naxal radicalization. This is where Naxal activity picked up very quickly. Then, the rural pockets of India, where land related issues were present, land reforms had not succeeded, where there was a lot of rural distress amongst the farmers. Because I'm sure all of you understand the difficult life of farmers in a country like India, especially back in 1960s and 70s. There wasn't adequate state support, be it for irrigation or other agricultural inputs, or in case of crop failures due to floods or droughts. Farmers were largely on their own with not much support coming in from the government. The Green Revolution, which took place around the same period in the 60s and 70s, it brought prosperity only to some rural pockets and agrarian pockets like Punjab, Haryana, whereas leaving behind other regions such as, let's say, West Bengal, Bihar, today's Odisha, Jharkhand, Chhattisgarh, etc. So many agrarian pockets were left behind, whereas some regions saw faster growth and faster development. And of course, the rural urban divide, which has become more evident post globalization, post 1990s, as India introduced the LPG reforms, opened up its economy, our cities and industrial centers and coastal locations have seen tremendous growth, especially in southern India, western India, leaving behind other parts of the country, creating a huge regional gap. So the rural urban divide, the agrarian distress, land related factors, they became the primary root causes for farmers, peasants, and as well as the landless laborers. Their frustration had built up over decades, and that is exactly what the Maoists were exploiting. The tribal resentment, particularly in central India as well as in parts of northeast India. Naxals would eventually spread towards the northeast region as well, in some parts of northeast India. They would focus on forest dwelling tribes, the indigenous ethnic groups. Because post independence, the government would bring various laws and policies focused on protecting the environment, focused on tribal welfare. But many tribal communities saw this as interference from the government. Because for centuries, tribal communities in India had been exploited by the British colonial government. British laws were primarily designed to target the tribals, to treat the tribals as barbarians, whereas looting the forest wealth and resources. Now, this is what is depicted in several movies as well, which are against colonialism, imperialism. So, tribal indigenous communities always held that anger against the state. So, in pre independent India, it was the colonial government which was exploiting them. But post independence, though they had hope initially on the Indian democratic setup and the constitution, they saw that some of the laws and policies were harming tribal welfare and tribal interests. Take, for example, environmental laws, the Forest Conservation Act, the Wildlife Protection Act of 1972. Though these laws had a good intention to protect the forest land, to protect our biodiversity and wildlife, right? Through Wildlife Protection Act, we started creating protected areas like national parks, tiger reserves, etc. This was much needed to tackle deforestation, to tackle hunting and poaching, and to protect our ecosystems. But the way in which it was implemented, the way in which national parks were set up, the way in which tiger reserves were created later in the 70s, 80s, 90s, in many cases, the local tribal community was not consented. The consent was not obtained in many instances. Because in these protected areas, in the core zone, human activity is completely prohibited. If you have studied about Wildlife Protection Act and related environmental laws, in a protected area such as a national park or a tiger reserve, in the core habitat zone, in the core zone, human activities are prohibited. Which means if there are indigenous communities, forest dwelling tribes, they will be evicted from the forests. They will lose their home, their land, their right to access the forest resources. They will be shifted out to the buffer zone or outside the protected area. This results in large scale displacement. It uproots the tribal communities from their entire life and livelihood because tribal communities have been connected to the forest and the land and the nature from centuries. Now, all of a sudden, when governments come in, implement such laws and policies, though the intention is good, if it leads to large scale displacement and if the government doesn't take their consent, if the government doesn't compensate them and rehabilitate them, that's, that creates a lot of resentment amongst the tribal groups. Also, the way in which industrial development was done in central eastern India, the Chota Nagpur Plateau region, the Dandakaranya region, was rich with resources, mineral wealth, and forest wealth. Most of the wealth was exploited by industrialists, government led companies, also resulting in large scale displacement of people. But the locals did not get the benefits. They saw the forest being cut down, they saw the environment being polluted and disrespected. But locals would not benefit from this directly, as most of the benefits of development was channeled towards other regions, whereas these pockets were left behind. So that is a genuine root cause, which was left unaddressed. So these were the primary concerns, the primary issues, along with a failure of governance and administration in several pockets in the country. The massive corruption in the government, the slow pace of economic growth and reforms and development because of the socialist policies, which had led to red tapeism, slow bureaucratic decision making, and corruption. The failure of welfare programs. Though the government came out with various welfare initiatives, the government tried to secure tribal rights. It tried to provide compensation for some large public projects where large scale displacement was seen. But on the ground, this would not be implemented effectively because there would be a lot of leakage of funds due to corruption. The funds would be diverted by corrupt officials and politicians, and at the grassroots, people would not benefit from this. If you look at the mega projects India executed in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, the large dams that we built, industries, mines that we opened, this led to large scale displacement, but in many cases, people were not consented. Their consent was not obtained. They were not rehabilitated. Compensation was not adequately paid. So, this created a sense of failure in governance and administration. They didn't see any improvement with regard to infrastructure, education, healthcare. So, when these basic necessities are not met, when there is a stark divide from region to region, from community to community, that is when such a revolution becomes almost inevitable, right? And if there are extremist ideologies flourishing, like Maoism, these Maoists will exploit the resentment, the genuine root causes, the grievances. They will turn this into an armed insurgency against the state. That is why there is a direct linkage between development and extremism. Lack of development, failure of governance administration will create a fertile ground for extremism. And vice versa is also true. One way to counter extremism in a conflict zone is to focus on development, addressing the genuine root causes. You can't dismiss the root causes which are genuine on the ground. You can't ignore the concerns of the farmers, the tribals, and the peasants and the workers. Right? If you have to win this war against such a strong ideological movement, you have to acknowledge the failure of governance, acknowledge the root causes, and try to address them while you parallelly target the extremists by using security forces. So this movement, it took it took root by 1967 and it started flourishing from 1970s. We saw the rapid evolution and spread of Naxalism across different pockets of central and eastern India. For the next 2 to 3 decades, Naxalism would become a serious threat for India's internal security. There were two different branches of Naxalism that developed during this period. One was led by the MCCI, the Maoist Communist Center of India. The other branch was led by the PWG, the People's War Group. Now, please concentrate on the map here. In this region, which I've highlighted here, the first circle, this is where MCCI was very active. It was based out of here, the Maoist Communist Center of India, based out of West Bengal, Bihar region, including today's Jharkhand, which mainly capitalized the land related issues, the feudal nature of the society, the agrarian problems, and the industrial divisions, and built the Maoist movement based on these resentments. This was a separate branch of communism, extreme Maoist movement that was seen in this part, led by MCCI, an insurgent outfit. Then, towards the central and southern parts, primarily towards then United Andhra Pradesh, which includes today's Telangana, and the region around Odisha, today's Chhattisgarh, parts of Maharashtra and Madhya Pradesh. Around this region, a different entity took root called the PWG, People's War Group. This was formed primarily by radicalizing student leaders in Osmania University, for example, in the Regional Engineering College in Warangal, which today is NIT Warangal. That is where the initial leadership of the Maoists were formed. The young student leaders were radicalized. They were pushed to take this path of violence. And around the Andhra Pradesh Odisha belt, we saw the rise of a parallel Maoist group called the PWG, the People's War Group. Apart from this, there were other communist factions, smaller factions here and there, operating across central eastern parts of India. Large scale violence was reported across this belt, the Red Corridor, the Naxal Corridor. Gradually, the movement and the ideology spread to even few pockets in southern India, especially along the Western Ghats, where tribal communities were present in Karnataka, Tamil Nadu, Kerala. For example, in the Wayanad belt of Kerala, in the Nilgiris belt of Tamil Nadu, in the Agumbe Chikmagalur region of Karnataka. In these pockets of Western Ghats, Naxals managed to make a presence. Though it was not a serious threat, they did manage to create a foothold for themselves. They also managed to build a base in Punjab, Haryana, the primary agrarian states of India, and also in pockets of Delhi NCR, where the industrial clusters were present. So in Punjab, Haryana, they tried tapping the resentment amongst the farmers. In the Delhi NCR belt, they tried to instigate the workers in factories to rebel against factory owners, against the capitalists. So these were the different pockets of the country that were affected. And India responded against this threat with brutal security operations in the 70s, 80s, and 90s. Because primarily, India saw this as a security problem in the initial years. And that was the big mistake that India made. In the 70s and 80s, be it the central government or the state governments, the concerned states, they saw this just as a law and order problem, as a policing problem. They never acknowledged or even thoroughly understood the root causes, the genuine root causes, and the strong ideological motivation. See, policing and law and order is primarily a state subject. According to the 7th schedule of the Constitution, public order, that's law and order, and policing, these are state subjects, right? So states were seen as primarily responsible to fight the threat. And state police, with some support from central government, from the Ministry of Home Affairs, they started taking on these insurgents. They engaged in targeted and focused security operations over 20, 30 years, waging counter-insurgency operations, leading to large-scale counter-violence. And we ended up weakening some of these groups, especially by late 80s and 90s. The PWG around the Andhra Pradesh belt was sufficiently weakened because of the tactical brilliance of the Andhra Pradesh police. The Andhra Pradesh police adopted some new tactics. They countered guerrilla warfare with guerrilla tactics by raising a special force unit called the Greyhounds. They raised a special force unit specializing in jungle warfare, in jungle survival. They mainly recruited the local youth who were affected by Naxalism because they would have a stronger motivation to fight the threat, as their lives would have been uprooted, their local economy would have been distracted because of the Naxal war. So local youth were mainly recruited by the Andhra Pradesh police, and the Greyhound Commando unit was trained by the Indian Army Special Forces. They were given specialized training in guerrilla jungle warfare. They were given specialized arms and equipment, better communication kits, better protective gear, and also financial incentives. Through this new strategy and model, Andhra Pradesh police managed to decimate the PWG in the Andhra Pradesh belt, around the borders of Maharashtra, Odisha. Parallelly, MCCI saw a big decline by 1990s. Not only because of the security operations, many of the top leaders were killed, eliminated, arrested. They also started losing ground support. Because post 1991, India saw tremendous growth in some parts of the country. As India introduced the LPG reforms, many pockets of India witnessed rapid growth and development. So we saw mass migration taking place, large scale migration of people from northern India, central, eastern India, where opportunities were less. And these people from the hinterlands migrated towards Delhi, Mumbai, Bengaluru, Hyderabad, Chennai, etc., the urban centers of India, finding new opportunities. So the Maoists saw a decline in the support base. The youth were looking for job opportunities in other parts of the country, moving out of the region. And as a result, we saw a decline in recruitment as well. Parallelly, security operations aimed at MCCI, PWG, and other communist factions, it was yielding some results. We were essentially hitting the leadership. And through these operations, we managed to bring down these groups. And we were on the verge of ending Naxalism by early 2000. Believe it or not, almost 22, 23 years ago, we were in a similar position, almost on the brink of defeating Naxalism in the country. MCCI had been weakened, PWG had been broken, and Naxals had been pushed into a corner around the Chhattisgarh Odisha belt, around the Dandakaranya region. But still, we couldn't defeat Naxalism. In fact, we saw a major revival of Naxalism after 2004. Remember, while discussing Maoist ideology, there was one point that Mao Zedong advocated the cadres to not only lead a mass armed rebellion, but he advocated the cadres to be prepared for a protracted people's war, meaning they're ready for these ups and downs. They're ready to lie low during the low phase, take a step back, regroup and revive, and come out with new strategies. Mao Zedong even called on the Maoists to form strategic alliances, to ally with other communist groups and other rebel groups if needed to counter the state. So, inspired by this doctrine of Maoism, MCCI and PWG, they carried out a strategic merger in 2004 to create the CPI Maoist, which is the current Maoist insurgent faction in the country. MCCI and PWG, both of which were weakened, almost decimated at that point, they came together to unite, form a strategic alliance, and built a new organization, the CPI Maoist, which raised its head in 2004. From here onwards, we saw a revival of Naxalism. The base had now shifted to the Chhattisgarh Odisha belt around the Dandakaranya region. Is that clear? Because the Maoists were pushed south from West Bengal and Bihar. They were pushed north from Andhra Pradesh, Telangana belt. Now they were cornered in Dandakaranya region around Chhattisgarh, Odisha, and following the merger, CPI Maoist staged a revival of Naxalism. They were able to better organize themselves, procure better arms, funds, and they started mounting major attacks against Indian security forces from 2004 to 2009. This was an important lesson for India, a learning lesson. It was in this context that then Prime Minister Manmohan Singh made that historic statement. He labeled left-wing extremism as India's biggest internal security threat. According to the Intelligence Bureau, this merger of PWG and MCCI in 2004 was the biggest internal security development of that era, of that period. They started mounting new attacks in Chhattisgarh, parts of Maharashtra, in the Vidarbha, Gachiroli region, in parts of Madhya Pradesh as well, and in Odisha and parts of Andhra Pradesh, Telangana. So we saw a major uptick in Naxal violence, and there were many attacks on security forces. So in the last 20 years, India has not only witnessed a renewed threat from Naxalism, but the government changed its approach and strategy. Starting with the Manmohan Singh government and now the Modi government. In the last 2 decades, new strategies have been adopted to counter Naxalism and ensure its complete eradication. Because when Prime Minister Manmohan Singh made this statement in 2005 and up until 2009, during this period, Naxal influence had spread almost to 170 to 180 districts in the country. That was more than 30% of India's geographical area. Out of these 170, 180 districts which were under Naxal influence, at least in 60 to 70 districts, they had managed to create a stronghold. And at least in 20 to 30 districts, they had declared so-called liberated zones where they had thrown out the administration and they were almost running parallel administrations. In fact, in some of these pockets of Chhattisgarh and Odisha, in places like Malkangiri, Dantewad, Sukma, Bijapur, in places such as these, district administration officials were scared to even go and work. For example, there were incidents where IAS officers would be kidnapped. I'm not saying this to scare you, but that was the reality of that period. When Naxals held sway in the region, there were targeted attempts to take aim at the government bureaucracy. They wouldn't allow elections to happen. They would target anybody who was pro-government and any locals as well who was believed to be a police informant. That was the situation that was present here. There were several districts where a parallel administration of sorts was being run. Many districts which had become the stronghold of Naxals, and almost 30% of India's geographical area had come under some sort of Naxal influence. That is the reason why the IB made an assessment that the merger of MCCI PWG to form CPI Maoist was the biggest internal threat for India. In fact, the CPI Maoist is a proscribed organization under the UAPA, the Unlawful Activities Prevention Act, which is our primary anti-terrorism law. Under the UAPA, the CPI Maoist is a designated organization, which is officially designated by the Home Ministry as a terrorist organization. Though technically it is an insurgent organization, Government of India has labeled CPI Maoist as a terrorist organization because of its mindless violence, brutal atrocities, and targeted killings of our security forces and as well as civilians. Now, what we need to understand is India's approach in the last 20 years to turn this threat and again reach a stage where we are almost on the brink of eradicating Naxalism. So, what did India do in these last 20 years? What has been the approach of the government, the counter strategy? What lessons were learnt by India? Did we incorporate those lessons? That is what we will learn in the last part of today's discussion. So, after Prime Minister Manmohan Singh made the statement by assessing that left-wing extremism was our biggest internal threat, the then UPA government launched a covert operation which remains unacknowledged even till date, which has been unofficially codenamed by the media as Operation Green Hunt. Reportedly, this covert counterinsurgency operation lasted several years, from 2009 to 2012, where the center deployed paramilitary forces such as the CRPF. Central Reserve Police Force was designated as the primary anti-Naxal force of the country to supplement the state police resources. And in coordination with intelligence agencies, the CRPF and state police launched targeted operations at Naxal leaders and various Naxal battalions. They registered tremendous success according to reports, though the government denies such operation was ever carried out because there were a lot of allegations regarding large-scale human rights violations. So media reports and expert analysis indicates that this covert counterinsurgency operation that went on across multiple states from 2009 to 2012 did yield some positive results, as many top leaders were eliminated, many modules were broken. It did bring some success for India, and we started seeing a decline in Maoist activity. But within few years, we again saw a slight pickup. In the last 8 to 10 years, we again saw attempts being made to revive the movement with some repeated attacks on our security forces. You might recollect some of the recent large-scale attacks on CRPF convoys and state police convoys in Bastar, in Gadchiroli, where many security forces personnel were martyred. So every now and then we have seen these acts of resurgence, and that is why the Modi government resolved to end Naxalism forever, and it has adopted a well-crafted strategy to defeat Naxalism. Now, before we talk about the counter strategy, let me explain what are the targets of these Naxals. This analysis can be important for mains. It could be relevant for a prelims question as well. So by now, I think you would have understood the primary target of Naxals is obviously the state. That is the government itself and anything that represents the government. It could be government offices, any public infrastructure created by the government. Naxals are known to target new roads, bridges, railway lines, even water tanks and mobile phone towers. This exposes the hypocrisy of Naxals, these Maoists. On one hand, they claim to fight for the masses who have been deprived of government welfare and development. When government acknowledges the problem and tries to develop the area with better connectivity, with better public infrastructure, these Naxals target the same infrastructure because they don't want progress in the region. If there is progress, if there is better governance, what will happen? They will lose the support. The locals will turn in favor of the government. They will lose the local base that they have. So they target government projects, public projects. They target government officials. primarily the police and security forces, and as well as the local administration, and sometimes even the politicians. So, anybody who represents the state. This includes elections. Naxals are known to disrupt elections. They give a boycott call. If anybody contests or stands in elections, those politicians will be targeted. If someone goes out to vote, cast their vote in the elections, those voters will be targeted. Even the officials who reach out to these remote areas to conduct elections on behalf of Election Commission of India, the electoral officers are also targeted. You might have seen the Bollywood movie Newton, which very well depicts how difficult it is to conduct elections in the Naxal corridor. That is based on ground realities. So they target elections, government offices and buildings, officials, and public projects. This is their primary target. They even target the industries, the business owners, as they oppose the capitalist model. They are also known to target locals if they believe they are acting as informants for the police and security forces and the intelligence agency. But otherwise, insurgents like Naxals usually don't target local civilians. They only target state forces and the state. Why? Because eventually, if they need mass support, tomorrow, if they have to capture power and form the future government, they can't do it without local support. If they target local civilians, right, they will antagonize them. They will lose the local support they have. Usually, insurgents like Naxals, they don't attack civilians and local community. They stay away from attacking them. They try to gain their support. But sometimes, if they believe that locals have turned against them, if they don't give them logistical support, because they depend on locals for shelter, for food, rations, and even for recruitment. So Naxals can't easily operate without logistical support from locals. They need that sympathy. That's why they usually spare locals, and also they're bothered about their global image. Tomorrow, if they manage to capture the state power and form a future government, they would like to be recognized. They would want recognition from the global community. So they appear to respect some human rights, respect some international laws, though they genuinely don't care about it. Because they want to keep the locals in their favor and create a good global perception if at all they come to power in the future. So that will not happen if they commit brutal atrocities and human right violations. But if they believe someone has informed the police, or if they're working for intelligence agencies passing on information, they don't hesitate to target local civilians as well. These are the primary targets. Now, if this movement has survived for so many decades, for 60 plus years, it means, right, you can conclude that the movement has been quite well funded. To end any insurgency, any conflict, trust me, you have to find the source of the money. Any war, any conflict is all about the money involved eventually. You trace the money route, find where it is coming from, you cut off that money supply, you can bring conflicts and wars to an end. Now, if you understand financing with regard to Naxalism, the financing routes and networks, there are different methods that are employed by these Naxals to raise the money for their operations. One preferred method is extortion. They act like a criminal gang by issuing threats. They will threaten local businesses. They will threaten local shops and markets, industrialists, factory owners, even politicians. They issue a life threat, or they kidnap, commit torture, set an example for others, and start collecting the hafta money, the extortion money. If locals don't pay extortion money, right, they will be targeted by the Naxals. So they use their arms, their weapons to terrorize the people. They run a cartel of sorts, a criminal network of sorts, to threaten the local businesses and the local community and the leaders and extract money from them. They call it local taxes. Since they are running a so-called parallel government, they call them local taxes. So if trucks are carrying goods and passing through the region, or if traders and businessmen are running their economic activities, They're all expected to pay this hafta, which is basically a ransom, and this is nothing but criminal extortion. There are some curious incidents where few local politicians have given a supari to target their opponents by using Naxals. Let's say there's a local politician, right? He wants to ensure he wins the election. He doesn't want any opposition. There have been instances in this belt where politicians have bribed, paid money to the Naxals essentially, and asked Naxals to target the opponents, ensuring nobody stands for election. And these corrupt politicians will keep on winning elections by paying money to the Naxals. Such incidents also have been noted. This again highlights the corrupt nexus which is present. It exposes the hypocrisy of these Naxals as well. Apart from this, Naxals resort to other types of organized crime, including drug production and drug trafficking. In some of the rural agrarian pockets and forested belts, Naxals force the locals to grow opium, right? Because there is a huge market for such drugs. They also tie up with drug cartels in the region and beyond from other foreign countries as well, if necessary. They smuggle drugs for them for a commission. They engage in arms trafficking. They engage in such criminal activities, even hunting, to carry out wildlife trafficking. Since they operate in forested belt, they can hunt animals, especially the threatened species, especially where the wildlife products have a huge black market. And they try to traffic wildlife products to earn revenue for Naxal operations. So organized crime, extortion is the primary source of funding for these Naxals. Clear? A lot of this illegal wealth is pushed through money laundering channels. They launder this illegal money, and they also receive some donations from sympathizers. There might be Naxal sympathizers across the country. Many of them could be well educated. They could be lawyers, journalists, professors. They themselves don't want to get their hands dirty. They don't want to directly fight this war, but they sympathize with the ideology. So those sympathizers across the country might fund Naxals by giving them donations or even by giving them material support, by giving them legal aid, by enabling their propaganda, right? Or by just accusing security forces of committing human rights violations to disrupt the encounters. So such support through legal aid and other material support could also be provided by some of the sympathizers along with donations. And Naxals are known to have built contacts with other terror groups and insurgents and hostile actors. Intelligence reports have indicated Naxals were in touch with various Northeast insurgents. They had connections with insurgent groups like the Ulfa. They've had links with Pakistan's intelligence agency, the ISI. They've had links with Chinese intelligence, the Ministry of State Security. There has been a covert involvement of Pakistan and China to some degree, to some extent, at least few decades ago, in enabling the Naxal movement. Naxals also had contacts with the LTTE in Sri Lanka, mainly to source advanced weapons and to receive training from them. So this is the reason why Naxalism has been a big source of threat for India. Now, how do they source the weapons? They do have some advanced weaponry with them. See, there are three different routes through which they source their weapons. One, they primarily loot police stations. They target the police stations and security bases. They attack the armory of the government where arms and weapons are stored. Obviously, state police in such areas will be on high alert. State governments that are affected by Naxalism, they would have raised dedicated anti-Naxal forces with some special training and special weapons with them. Wherever these police stations and armories are present, Naxals will attack them. They'll not only kill as many police and security officers as possible, but they loot the armory and they steal all the advanced weaponry. That's why Naxals sometimes have the same weaponry as our security forces, like the INSAS rifles and other standard ammunition which is issued to our forces. It is available with Naxals because they mainly looted them from our security force. Let's say they carry out an ambush attack. Let's say they know a police convoy is coming, right? They would have placed an IED bomb. Naxals are masters in building improvised explosive devices, hiding them under roads and bridges, and they detonate them. So they blow up the entire convoy. They would surround the convoy, open heavy fire, kill all the police officers, and whatever weapons are left, the guns, the automatic rifles, grenades, and rocket launchers, everything. They'll steal everything, including the walkie talkies and communication kits. So, looting is one of their primary strategies to acquire modern weaponry. Second, they do have some connections with global arms traffickers. They do try to procure some advanced weaponry, especially assault rifles like AK-47s, right? Then machine guns, self-loading automatic rifles, even GPS navigation kits, advanced communication radios, and as well as satellite phones. Such advanced gear, military grade weapons and gear is procured by working with global arms cartels, by working with other insurgent and terrorist groups. And finally, they also procure local weapons which are produced in these illegal gun making factories, especially in UP, Bihar, and Nepal along the Terai belt. There are a lot of illegal gun making factories. These country guns, right, which are locally produced, they don't even fire properly. Most of them malfunction. They're mainly used by local gangsters and criminals across the UP Bihar belt. If you have seen web series like Mirzapur, right, it is very well depicted in a historical manner how these local country guns backfire. So Naxals have relied heavily on this as well because it's cheaper, easier to access and procure. So these are the different sources of collecting weapons and advanced ammunition. Now, finally, coming to our counter strategy, what has been India doing? What is our approach to defeat Naxalism? Initially, in the first 3 to 4 decades, we had a very short sighted approach to fight Naxalism. It was more of a reaction. It was not a well thought out approach. It was an ad hoc reaction of the government. Governments mainly saw this as a security problem, and they did not acknowledge some of the genuine root causes that existed. So be it the central government or the state governments from 70s to early 2000, they mainly tried to tackle this as a security threat, launching counterinsurgency operations trying to target Naxals without addressing the core root problems that were present. This strategy initially gave some results, as we discussed. We did manage to weaken Maoist factions like MCCI and PWG. They were almost on the brink of decimation. But eventually, what happened? These entities they merged to form CPI Maoist and staged a major revival. See, this was a learning lesson for India. You can't defeat a strong ideological movement if you don't address the root causes. You can't just look at this as a security problem. You need to address the root causes that are present. The developmental issues, the mal-governance, which was the root cause. So post 2004, after Prime Minister Manmohan Singh labeled left-wing extremism as our biggest internal threat, India has adopted a two-pronged approach, a two-step approach. These two key pillars define India's fight against Naxalism in the last 20 years. One, there is a development-focused approach, addressing the developmental problems, the governance-related issues, by acknowledging the failure of governance, by trying to understand the genuine root causes, the land-related issues, the agrarian issues, the tribal-related issues. Governments have genuinely put in an effort to understand them, to address them, and provide better welfare and better developmental opportunities. Parallelly, we have mounted effective, targeted security operations. Counterinsurgency operations have become more effective as they are intelligence driven through real time intelligence. With better intelligence gathering, targeted operations have been launched against the senior leadership and the mid level leadership of Naxals to wipe out Naxalism at the top and thus bring down the movement itself. So, to defeat such a strong ideological movement, you need a combination of both a development approach focusing on administration, better welfare, and governance, and a effective security approach focusing on intelligence based counterinsurgency operations to wipe out Naxalism from the root. So, under the development approach, the Manmohan Singh government and now the Modi government, they have taken many steps. initiated various welfare programs, developmental programs focused on the most affected districts with regard to left-wing extremism. For example, from 2010 to 2012, the then UPA government under Prime Minister Manmohan Singh planned and implemented the Integrated Action Plan, which was conceptualized by the Planning Commission, the then erstwhile Planning Commission. Through this, dedicated funds were provided to the most affected districts, and the local district administration was given the autonomy to decide how the funds would be utilized. So, dedicated funds were placed in the hands of a district committee, which would be headed by the district commissioner, along with the superintendent of police and the forest officer in the district forest officer. Basically, the top officials, the bureaucrats, the IAS, IPS, IFOS officers of the district, they would be part of this committee, and autonomy was given to them to decide how the funds would be spent to ensure that this additional funding will help in bridging the gaps in governance. So, under the program, better roads were created, water and electricity problems were resolved, school infrastructure was built, mobile connectivity was set up, local issues affecting that particular district was solved. Because see, you can't have a uniform approach. You can't have a one size fits all approach. In each state, the problems were different. In each district, in each village, the problems were different. So a customized, flexible plan was implemented. Then we have welfare programs like Manrega that guaranteed employment in the rural areas, putting cash directly in the hands of the beneficiaries, which played a big role in uplifting the rural income, in addressing agrarian distress. The Forest Rights Act was brought out, a flagship law championed by the then UPA government to recognize tribal rights, including tribal rights over land, as well as tribal rights over forest resources and community conservation rights. These basic rights were recognized under the Forest Rights Act. Dedicated tribal welfare programs were implemented. All-round improvement has been seen in education, healthcare, rural development, and basic socio-economic development. Better financial inclusion, implementation of digital e-governance to reduce the corruption, to reduce the leakage of funds. Schemes like PDS have become much more efficient with the introduction of technology, with implementation of Aadhaar and the JAM Trinity, which the Modi government has pioneered by linking bank accounts, the Jandan bank accounts with Aadhaar and mobile phone numbers. It has helped in rolling out DBT, direct benefit transfer, which has plugged the gaps and leakages to address corruption in the system. So these all-round developmental programs at the district and village level has yielded phenomenal results. Digital connectivity has been enhanced with dedicated focus. Dedicated funds have been spent to connect the unserved regions, the remote tribal belts and rural pockets and mountainous areas. They have been brought under the mobile internet map of India. With the extension of mobile internet network and telephone services, this will automatically trigger economic activities, creating livelihood opportunities for the locals. Government has focused on skill development programs. You might have heard of skill development initiatives like Roshni. We have a dedicated ministry today for skill development, running the Skill India initiative. The focus has been on providing basic skills for tribal communities, women, and the local youth. So even with limited education, they can seek out job opportunities, entrepreneurial opportunities. Microcredit has been rolled out with focus on self-help groups to encourage women-led collectives to borrow these micro loans and set up local businesses to create local employment opportunities. Agri insurance has been stepped up and well implemented to protect farmers from the irregularities of agriculture, to protect them from crop failure, essentially. So, all round development has been witnessed in most of these pockets, and this has been pivotal to swing the public opinion in favor of the government and turn the masses against the Naxals themselves. Local support has been declining. Also, because of opportunities coming up in other states and cities, Much of the youth population, they have migrated. And as a result, Naxals have seen a significant decline in the support base. They're not able to get quality cadres, which is a core Maoist principle. They're not able to increase their recruitment. Parallelly, we have stepped up the security operations. The Ministry of Home Affairs, which is the nodal ministry for internal security, it set up a dedicated division, the Left-Wing Extremism Division, under the internal security branch of the MHA. So there has been dedicated focus from the MHA to assist the affected states. The MHA has been providing funds, intelligence, supplementing the state anti-Naxal forces with central armed police forces like the CRPF. CRPF is the designated anti-Naxal force. The CRPF has even raised a elite special force commando unit known as Cobra, the Commando Battalion for Resolute Action, which specializes in jungle warfare, guerrilla warfare tactics. It has also received training from the Guerrilla Warfare Division of the Indian Army. The Indian Army has a special force school that trains commandos in jungle survival and guerrilla warfare tactics. So Cobra units, which is a special force unit of CRPF, has been trained in jungle warfare. Even the BSF and few battalions of SSB and ITBP are deployed where necessary to assist and complement the state police forces. The MHA has even implemented few dedicated programs such as the Security Related Expenditure Scheme to reimburse the cost of police modernization. So it's an incentive based model for state governments to invest in police modernization, to modernize their police forces with better training, better equipment, better arms and weapons, and better technology. And the entire cost is borne by the center. It is reimbursed by the Home Ministry under the special and under the SRE scheme. There are dedicated schemes such as special central assistance to fortify the police stations, which are the primary targets of Naxals, to create better police infrastructure and fortify the police stations and the armories so police forces can defend themselves and these attacks can be repelled. Also, the government has spent heavily on improving connectivity, building roads and bridges, improving mobile infrastructure, because this will not only help the local economy and civilians, it would help the security forces as well to move around the region and to deploy the troops. More importantly, modern technology and better intelligence has been brought into picture. The Intelligence Bureau, the Central Intelligence Agency responsible for domestic intelligence, has been working with NTRO, the National Technical Research Organization, which is our premier technical intelligence agency, to intercept Naxal communication, to plant agents and operatives, to generate human intelligence, and as well as technical intelligence. We have even deployed satellites, drones, and other advanced technologies to carry out surveillance and monitoring, to detect the movement of Naxals, trace their patterns, and use the intelligence for targeted operations. Is that clear? Along with this, security forces and the administration have been trying to manage the perception as well. They are trying to counter the propaganda of the Naxals. Remember, I told you Naxals are masters of propaganda and communication. That's how they brainwash the locals. So it's important to counter the Naxal ideology, to amplify the success of the government, and show that Naxal ideology is inherently hypocritical and violent. So perception management, narrative management is important. And the security forces, intelligence agencies, and the administration have been implementing these strategies as well to control the media narrative, to spread the counter message, the official government message, to defeat the propaganda of the Naxals. Even Indian Air Force has been deployed along with Indian Army in a non-combat support role. Now, some of you might be wondering, why hasn't India deployed the armed forces? Why haven't we brought in the army or the air force to conduct large-scale operations, military operations against Naxals? See, this is a conscious decision taken by subsequent governments. Because when you bring in your armed forces, such as the army or the air force, you are risking a bigger conflict, because security forces like the air force or the army, they are primarily meant for external enemies to fight external wars. They are heavily equipped. They carry heavy arms and weapons with them, like fighter jets, helicopters, then artillery guns, battle tanks, advanced assault rifles. And defense forces like army, air force, they are trained to kill. Their first resort is to use violence as an option because they are trained to deal with the external enemy. When you deploy such forces for an internal conflict, such as the Naxal movement, this might end up causing a lot of collateral damage. A lot of civilians could get caught in the crossfire, leading to large scale human rights violations. And this will create a vicious cycle. The more force you use, the more violations you commit, the more civilian killings from the side of the security forces. It will create more anger among the locals. It will create more resentment, and they will start favoring the Naxals. So, in any such conflict, it's important to manage the equation, the relationship between security forces and the locals. You need to win the hearts and minds of the local people. You need to gain their trust. That is extremely critical. That's why governments have decided not to use army, air force in a combat role. They have been used only in a non-combat support role, where army provides training, special force training in guerrilla warfare, jungle warfare for the special force units like Cobra of CRPF, Greyhounds of Andhra Pradesh Police, right? Similarly, Chhattisgarh, Odisha, other states also have raised their own dedicated special forces, which have been trained by Indian Army. Indian Air Force has provided logistical support. It has deployed helicopters and planes, primarily to help in troop deployment and also to help in casualty evacuation. If there is an encounter and troops are injured or civilians are injured, to quickly evacuate them and provide medical assistance, and to deploy troops and send reinforcements. So, Air Force is used only for transportation, for logistics. So, it's a non combat support role given to the Air Force and the Army, but the fight is led by the state police forces, their anti Naxal units, with backing from the Central Armed Police Forces like CRPF, with intelligence from the intelligence agencies like IB and others. This is what has helped India to step up the fight, to engage in targeted intelligence based operations aimed at the leadership. The Modi government streamlined this policy by implementing a national plan, a national policy and action plan in 2015 that brings all these strategies and approaches together under a single policy and action plan. Be it the targeted security operations, the development initiatives and approaches, securing the rights and entitlements of locals, especially tribals and farmers, and managing the perception. All these initiatives of the government, of the center and state, has now been streamlined under the National Policy and Action Plan. So, be it better infrastructure creation, better welfare programs, implementation of government schemes, or targeted, effective security operations, they've all been brought under this National Policy and Action Plan. In 2017, the MHA notified a doctrine to be followed by all the stakeholders in this fight. All the stakeholders, be it the state governments, the police and central armed police forces, the intelligence agencies, they're all expected to follow this doctrine called SAMADHAN Doctrine. It's an acronym. S stands for smart leadership by the state government, by the police and security forces. A for aggressive strategy, to be proactive in targeting the Naxals. M for motivation and training, ensuring high levels of motivation and training for the security forces. A for actionable intelligence, not some generic intelligence, but actionable real time intelligence, which is reliable, based on which you can launch targeted operations. D for dashboard based KPIs, to track the key performance indicators, to measure the progress and success and generate a feedback. H for harnessing technology, deploying satellites and drones for better surveillance, using advanced communication, intercepting Naxals communication, and using GPS based navigation, etc. A for action plan for each theater, coming out with customized plans for every state, for every district. So, for every theater of combat, there should be a separate action plan. You can't have a uniform approach, a one size fits all approach will not work. N for no access to financing, cutting off the money route, tackling money laundering and the sources of financing that we discussed. These are the pillars of Samadhan doctrine. So this combined effort of center and states has yielded significant results for India, and today we are witnessing a major decline in Naxalism. Just look at the map here, which is based on the data from MHA. You will see a major shift happening from 2007 to 2017. Earlier, I told you that 170 to 180 districts were under the strong influence of Naxals, with at least 60 to 70 strongholds. By 2017, within a decade, this went down drastically. It came down significantly, and Naxalism was now cornered only in some pockets of central and eastern India. But the last 7 to 8 years has been pivotal in our fight against Naxalism, especially post 2020. The Modi government has been working very actively with the states, especially Chhattisgarh and Odisha and Andhra Pradesh and Telangana, to break the last remaining strongholds of Naxals. You can see in this map how the red corridor has shrunk over the last few years. If you look at the Gadchiroli region in Maharashtra, the Vidarbha belt, if you look at the tribal belts of Andhra Pradesh, Telangana, the forested belts of Chhattisgarh, Odisha, some pockets of Jharkhand, Bihar, the influence has been significantly brought down with only few hotspots remaining. So places like Sukma, Bijapur, Dantewad, Malkangiri, these are some of the last remaining hotspots. But in most of the other districts, we have been able to clear the influence of Naxalism. According to a latest update from MHA, which was submitted last year to the Lok Sabha, officially, according to the government of India, today only 38 districts in the country are considered to be Naxal affected. Imagine this number was 170, 180 just a few years ago. This points towards a significant reduction in Naxal activity as their financing has been cut. Thousands of Naxal cadres at the lower level have surrendered. Their recruitment has fallen, and the top leadership, who are all old, who are in the middle rank and the top ranks, they've all been eliminated, most of them neutralized, thus bringing down Naxalism on its head. So today, there are just few pockets that are left. The data, the statistics speak for themselves. That's why many experts believe we are likely witnessing the death of Naxalism, a much needed elimination of this biggest internal security threat of India. Last year alone, in 2024, hundreds of Naxals have been eliminated by security forces. The affected districts are down to just 38, and within these 38 districts, the most affected has reduced from 12 to 6 in the last few years. So, which are these 6 most affected districts? Please make a note of this. This can be important. 4 districts in Chhattisgarh: Bijapur, Kanker, Narayanpur, and Sukma. 1 from Jharkhand, West Singhbum, and 1 from Maharashtra, Gadchiroli. These are the 6 most affected districts. It was 12 few years ago. Now it has come down to just 6. Districts of concern, which is the next classification, it has reduced from 9 to 6, mainly located in Andhra Pradesh, Madhya Pradesh, Telangana, etc. And the other affected districts has gone down from 17 to 6. And those with some relative Naxal activity and influence is somewhere around 20. So in total, just 38 districts are reporting some kind of Naxal activity, and only 6 strongholds are remaining today. So it's just a matter of time. Look at this statistic from the MHA again. I'm entirely basing my argument on official statistics. In 2024, the security forces neutralized 290 Naxals in encounters, most of them at the middle level and top level of the leadership. Thousands of them were arrested, many have surrendered. In the last decade alone, close to 9 to 10,000 Naxals have surrendered. And look at the graph here, very, very important graph. The number of security forces martyred is down by 94% from 2010 to 2022. The total deaths in the Naxal conflict, including that of civilians and Naxals, it is down by 90%. Number of civilians killed is down by 87%, making the corridor, the region, much more safer for the local civilians, the innocent civilians, which means collateral damage has gone down. The total incidents associated with Naxal violence has declined by 76%, and the districts reporting any kind of Naxal violence has gone down by 53%. So, as I said, the data, the statistics, they speak for themselves. So, last year, close to 300 Naxals were eliminated. And based on this tremendous success, Union Home Minister Amit Shah set a very ambitious goal for the government and the security forces. The Union Home Minister declared a target that by 31st March 2026, by next year, a 1 year deadline was given. It was announced in March 2025 that we are going to eradicate Naxalism from the country because we are on the brink of ending this threat. So once this target was laid down, the security forces led by CRPF and its Cobra Special Force Unit, they are working with the state police special forces to launch targeted operations at the top leadership who are hiding in these remote parts. The government is adopting the trace, target, neutralize approach, meaning you identify the top leaders, locate them, target them, and eliminate them. The government is going for the kill. And for this purpose, a counterinsurgency operation codenamed as Operation Black Forest was launched a couple of months ago, also called as Operation Conquer. And it has yielded the most significant result. The General Secretary of the CPI Maoist, who's the highest in the hierarchy, the top leader of the CPI Maoist, known by the name, the alias Basavaraju, Nambala Keshwarao, his real name, who has been a notorious Naxal since the 70s. At one point, he was a student leader, right, from the Andhra Telangana belt, who went on to join the movement. He was seen as a specialist in building IED bombs, in leading the military operations, the targeted operations of the Naxals. 2009-10, there were big attacks on CRPF, where several troops were martyred. These operations were personally directed, planned, and executed by Basavaraju. So now he had risen to the rank of the General Secretary, heading the CPI Maoist, and he has been eliminated in a targeted encounter on the borders of Chhattisgarh, Telangana. This is a significant victory. In the last few months, 15 members from the Central Committee and Politburo have been neutralized by the security forces through intelligence-based operations. Now, to understand why this is important, you need to look at the organizational hierarchy of the Communist Party. I will take the reference of the Communist Party of China so you can understand the importance of the Central Committee and the Politburo. See, in the Communist Party, in a communist setup, obviously there is no democracy. There are no democratic elections. Members of Communist Party who have enrolled as members in the Communist Party, they eventually elect members of the National Party Congress. The delegates are chosen through the National Party Congress, which takes place once in every 5 years. This is the equivalent of democratic elections. It's not democratic at all, but internally within the party, there is some sort of election that takes place where the members will nominate and elect the delegates. They will go on to elect and appoint the members of Central Committee, which is one of the highest decision-making bodies. You can compare this with our Council of Ministers, for example. From the Central Committee, Politburo members are chosen. Around 24 Politburo members. It's like the cabinet. Then within the Politburo, there is a Politburo Standing Committee comprising the top 7 leaders. It's like one of the cabinet committees within the Union Cabinet, the highest decision-making body. And then comes the Supreme Leader, the General Secretary himself. Currently, it would be Xi Jinping in China. This is the organizational hierarchy that I was talking about. Imagine, in the CPI Maoist in India, we have managed to eliminate 15 members in the last just few months. 15 members from Central Committee and Politburo. This is the biggest blow for Naxalism in the country. The top head, the middle tier is being cut off, which could easily push to the death and collapse and eradication of Naxalism. This year, we have already neutralized 300 plus Naxals. According to media reports, 300 plus Naxals have been neutralized. Many have surrendered. So that's why experts believe we are on the brink of winning this war. We might be staring at a possibility by next year, in few months, where we might eradicate one of India's oldest insurgencies. But a critical assessment is equally important because we have been in this stage before as well. In 2003, 2004, Naxalism was on the brink of collapse. MCCI, PWG had almost been decimated. But then we saw the merger and the rise of a new outfit, the CPI Maoist, and a complete revival of Naxalism. So we cannot be complacent. There is always a possibility of a revival. If you understand Maoist ideology by now, you will realize that Maoists are prepared for a protracted war. They are ready for these defeats, these low points. They know how to take a step back, wait for some time, appear to talk as well. There are reports that some Naxal leaders who are remaining, they have reached out to the government asking for a peace process. Since most of them are being killed and eliminated, now they are reaching out for a peace process. So they know how to buy time, try to regroup and revive, maybe next 5 years, in next 10 years, or maybe in 20, 30 years. So this is a very strong ideological movement which will not go away unless and until you address the genuine root causes. Definitely, India has done much better in the last 20 years in terms of administration governance, but we need to plug the gaps, address each and every concern of the farmers, the tribal community, ensure that local support is completely taken away. That's why security approach alone will not win you this war. It could help you weaken and decimate the movement, but it could become dormant and it might revive later. So the focus should be to address the administrative governance related problems, address the genuine root causes, ensuring that the local support is completely taken out and give some of them the opportunity to surrender and come back into mainstream. State governments have been having a surrender policy for many years. So encouraging Naxals to surrender and come back into mainstream, addressing the root problems along with these targeted operations is what will give the results. But however, there are deep concerns about the human rights situation. In any conflict, the unfortunate reality is that innocent civilians will pay the price as they get caught between the insurgents and the security forces. As I told you, Naxals are known to target civilians as well, especially if they believe they are informants or if they're not giving them local support. There have been alleged instances of security forces carrying out human rights violations as well. Is that clear? Especially when big attacks have taken place. The local units would be angry that their brothers have been slaughtered by the Naxals. There have been instances where they have taken out revenge on the local villagers by alleging that they gave local support to extract information from them. They would target entire villages, burn them down. There have been incidents of torture, custodial killings, even rapes and molestations. In some cases, honest investigations have been done. Responsible officers have been held guilty and punished. But please understand, you can't afford such violations from the forces at any cost. See, Indian security forces are thoroughly professional, well trained, well educated. They understand the law of the land. They understand the constitutional limitations and the ethics and the morality of these operations. But once in a while, there might be these rogue officers, rogue units, which might bring a bad name to the entire force. Because some of these allegations are not without proof or evidence. There has been a smoking gun to indicate some of the operations might have led to large-scale human rights violations. There have been cases of fake killings, fake encounters as well, custodial tortures and killings. So we can't afford this because you will lose the trust of the people. You will alienate the locals if such incidents happen. So if at all they happen, the government should be transparent, investigate the cases, ensure the guilty rogue officers are punished, make an example out of them, or else you will create a vicious cycle. If the trust element is broken, right, because security forces, they represent the government on the ground. They are the face of the state. If they are seen as brutal, people will lose the trust and faith in the system itself. So if you have to win the hearts and minds of the people in a conflict zone, you have to win over the local support. That is critical in a conflict zone. For example, there was a very controversial practice called Salva Judum that was practiced by the Chhattisgarh State Police. A few years ago, Chhattisgarh government and the state police, they started raising a private militia. They started arming the local Koya tribes. The police and the government itself gave arms and weapons to Koya tribes, gave them the rank of special police officers, gave them a financial incentive as well. Their job was to hunt Naxals. Now, some of you might argue this is a great strategy to create a private army which can back the police and security forces. But please understand, in a constitutional setup, you cannot have such private armies and militias, that too with a bounty announced, because in most cases this would get misused. These so-called Koya commandos would have no professional training, who wouldn't understand human rights and the constitutional rights and limitations. They would end up misusing the rank and the authority given to them and the weapons given to them. Plus, they would be driven by the greed of getting the bounty for themselves. They would target many innocents as well, or even Naxals who are surrendering. They would kill them, and they would basically get the rewards in return. Large scale human rights violations were reported under Salwa Judum. Eventually, this matter reached the Supreme Court. And under the Nandini Sundar case in 2011, the Supreme Court delivered a historic verdict, a landmark judgment, declaring Salwa Judum as unconstitutional. Since then, Salwa Judum has been disbanded. But there are some disturbing reports that such private militias continue in different forms. Though the governments don't acknowledge it, in different forms, allegedly, such private militias continue, especially in states like Chhattisgarh. So, addressing the human right concerns, focusing on genuine developmental issues and root causes, while stepping up security operations is critical if we have to defeat and end Naxalism forever. We are staring at a once in a generation opportunity to end one of India's oldest insurgency. So, this is not the time to be complacent for the government. This is the time to step up the fight and end this extremist movement forever. So, the conclusion point is that you can't win this war just with brute force. Along with targeted, proportionate operations, you parallelly need a development focused initiative to address the root problems while ensuring human rights are upheld. Only then we can win this war against a strong ideology. It's a strong ideological movement. To defeat it, we need a proportionate mixed response. So, on this note, I conclude my discussion. I hope it has been a fruitful, interesting session. It has been roughly 2 or 20 minutes, but a big topic covering all the dimensions, all the perspectives has been completed. So, whatever we have discussed will directly help you answer your mains questions. You can even expect a possible essay topic on Naxalism, on India's internal conflicts, and some prelims questions as well on the facts that we have discussed. So, please take up these two questions for your answer writing practice. Try to write answers from what we have discussed, and please share your answers in the comments so it can help other students as well. So with this, I conclude my discussion. If you want the PDF with the annotations, with all the detailed notes, please join my Telegram channel. I'll be sharing it on my Telegram channel by tomorrow morning. So if you liked the session, benefited from the class, please press the like button, share your comments as I asked you. If you want us to cover other important topics like this through one single class, giving you comprehensive coverage, please let us know in the comments. Name the topics and we will try to discuss those topics as well. And subscribe to the channel if you want more such initiatives, and we'll see you in the next video. Till then, take care. Have a good night.